A very good evening to you and welcome to the Hot Seat. I'm Nicola D'Souza, and today on the Hot Seat I have with me Mariam Faruqi, who's the South Asia Regional Director for Pro Bono. Good evening, Mariam.
Good evening, Nikki. Thank you for having me on your show.
So before we get into what exactly Pro Bono is, I'm a lawyer myself. Mariam, why don't you give us a brief background on exactly how you got here in your career?
Well, Nikki, I started off with an undergraduate degree in social anthropology, which is where I developed an interest in human rights and the law. And I later decided to pursue legal studies in order to gather the relevant tools to work effectively in a rights-based sphere. So I worked from there and qualified as a solicitor in the UK and focused my career on public law, human rights and immigration law, and practiced for about 10 years.
Wow, okay. So you were telling me earlier that you got into a lot of pro bono work. Why don't you tell us a bit about what exactly is pro bono legal work?
Well, pro bono work is a very old concept within the legal sphere. It's a Latin term, pro bono publico, which means for the public good. And that's exactly what it is, the idea of doing legal work and providing free legal services in order to put something back into society. And it's not a new concept, the legal profession. I think there are very few lawyers in the jurisdictions that we work in who don't actually do some sort of pro bono legal work.
Right. And is that how you got into Pro Bono?
In a way, yes. I always did legal aid and pro bono work. So to differentiate, legal aid is the government based system whereby they provide support to vulnerable clients who can't perhaps pay for their legal services. And pro bono is a service which is provided by lawyers themselves, not incentivized by the government. So I worked in a legal aid background for many legal aid firms in the UK and in other jurisdictions in South Asia, for example, but always had pro bono work within my remit of work. Pro Bono itself was started by a young UK-based lawyer of Indian origin, Shireen Irani, and she was a practicing solicitor at a corporate firm in the UK and set up the idea of engaging the corporate legal sector in pro bono projects.
Right, as opposed to getting the government involved. It's more privately funded, is it?
Well, just by way of background, the UK has a relatively strong history and system of legal aid, but due to government cutbacks, there was a slow dissemination of the legal aid system. So to fill that gap, Shireen considered that it would be useful for corporate lawyers to get more engaged in free legal work to provide the vulnerable beneficiaries who may be losing out because of the lack of legal aid.
So how far has Pro Bono come after its insemination, and how has it developed in the international community?
That's a great question. So since 2009, when Pro Bono was established in the UK, we then moved to India, as we felt that there was a need for establishing a more structured pro bono environment over there. And we now are in a position where we provide vulnerable communities, non-profit organizations and civil society organizations with free legal support on a variety of levels. So it could be anything from transactional corporate legal support for a non-profit organization to strengthen and capacity build, all the way through to strategic litigation work. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that further along the conversation. But we work effectively globally across 39 countries now. Wow. And we have a database of 60,000 lawyers across the world who are willing to engage in pro bono projects.
So how exactly does it work? Now we know how legal aid works, especially in Sri Lanka, but how does Pro Bono function? How does it connect the legal community with the clientele who need legal services?
Well, it's a very simple system. A lawyer can register online on our network, and organizations at the same time register on our network, and that can be through outreach by our team or by word of mouth, for example. The organizations will post legal projects. It can be anything from how to register as an organization in a specific jurisdiction, all the way through to more nuanced research or litigation work. Our programs team, who are themselves qualified lawyers, will then match and connect those organizations with lawyers. That's the very basic core of our work. With the litigation work, that's brought to us by our partner organizations, and we've developed a specific expertise in child rights cases, specifically representing child victims of sexual abuse at the high court level, and now more recently at the trial court level as well.
So you all don't just stick to like the civil areas of law, the corporate areas of law. What other areas? Is it a wide variety and every sort of aspect of law, or is it something specific that you all focus on?
It is actually a very wide variety of areas of law. It depends very much on the jurisdiction where we're working. So the corporate advice is very much required by a lot of the civil society organizations we deal with, but the litigation work could involve criminal litigation, civil actions for compensation for child victims of sexual abuse. We've also recently done a spate of housing cases in India. We're going to be developing our expertise on economic, social and cultural rights and the related litigation in other South Asian jurisdictions, including Nepal and Bangladesh.
Okay, so how do you, you were telling me earlier that you provide everything else that's necessary in terms of the administrative work that's needed for these kind of legal services. Can you explain a bit more about that, how you help the lawyers to help the clients?
Yes, I mean, we spoke a little bit about what pro bono work actually is, and it's providing free legal services to vulnerable beneficiaries. Now, the reality is that lawyers are running businesses, they have busy schedules, they have other cases to manage, and we want to ensure that they manage their pro bono work just as they would other cases. So our programs teams provide the administrative legal support all the way through from client care to taking witness statements to ensuring court dates are adhered to in a timely manner. So it really depends on the project. It depends very much on how much time the lawyers can provide for the pro bono cases, and we gauge it on a case-by-case basis. But the main emphasis is providing the lawyers with a valuable opportunity to conduct the pro bono cases in a high-quality way, and that ensures that the beneficiaries are getting the best legal advice possible.
Wow, okay, so I'll get back to you on that, but we'll be back after a short commercial break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Hot Seat. I'm in conversation with Mariam Faruqi, who's the South Asia Regional Director of iPro Bono. Before we went in for the commercial break, we were talking about how iPro Bono basically gets in touch with the lawyers and the clients and connects them together. How is the interaction between the lawyers and the clients? Do they interact directly with them, or do you all provide services as the mediators between the two parties?
It depends, again, very much on the projects that we're working on. We definitely remain very involved in all the projects from the beginning to the end to ensure a high quality of work. And now that we've developed our own expertise in certain areas of law, we're actually involved in the cases in providing legal advice ourselves. But effectively, the aim is to provide a realistic model for both the lawyers and the clients. There are occasions where a lawyer will want to be far more involved with the client work and meet the clients face to face on a regular basis. On the other hand, there are situations where we've conducted legal projects where the lawyers and the clients don't actually meet and all the work is conducted online. It depends very much on the nature of the problem at hand. I think the thing to keep in mind is that you want to provide the lawyers with the best opportunity to get the pro bono project done, and you want to provide the highest quality legal advice to the beneficiaries or the beneficiary organization.
And how do you match the cases that come to you to the lawyers? How do you make sure that it's a lawyer who's suitable to handle that kind of work, that area of law? How do you decide that?
There are a few different ways. I mean, the most basic way is that when a lawyer joins our network, whether they register online themselves or with the support of our project managers and project officers, they will identify their areas of expertise. So for example, where we have corporate lawyers or commercial lawyers or employment lawyers, they would have specified what their areas of expertise are, and we will accordingly match them with the relevant project. Now, where you have more nuanced litigation work, we've actually, I'm going to use an example from India. We have developed panels of lawyers who apply to us on a competitive basis, and they're carefully selected for different types of cases. I had mentioned that we have an expertise in child sexual abuse cases. Yes. So they are civil and criminal lawyers who have their own practices but may have a specialization in family law or child rights law. And at the moment we have about 16 lawyers on 3 different panels who work with us on a rolling basis on these pro bono litigation cases at the trial court and the high court level.
All right, that's interesting. So finally, iProbono has decided to launch in Sri Lanka. So how far have you worked that out? How is it going so far?
Well, we're very excited to have brought the project here. We've actually been working here since about 2014, and our Sri Lanka country representative, who's also our equality law director, Aratha Vikramasinghe, has been doing some really interesting projects on promoting child rights and women's rights in the country. This is actually part of a wider South Asia Access to Justice program that iProbono is running, which takes us all the way from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, to Sri Lanka as well. So the aim is to work with local organizations in Sri Lanka, and we're hoping this will be beyond just the larger cities, working in more deprived areas as well, focusing on the very specific needs of organizations and vulnerable beneficiaries here. But we're also hoping that this will be an opportunity to connect the region and ensure that lawyers across the region are sharing knowledge and best practice.
So how do you think iProbono, what does iProbono hope to achieve by launching in Sri Lanka and having a base here? And what do you think the Sri Lankan community that are in need of free legal services can benefit as well?
Well, I think the aim is twofold. It's to ensure that the gap in access to justice is met, that vulnerable beneficiaries are receiving adequate legal support for their various legal needs, but also to provide lawyers in the country with quality opportunities of engaging in pro bono work. From the lawyers that I've met here myself during this visit, there are very few lawyers who don't engage in pro bono work. They definitely do engage in pro bono work over here, but I think there's a need for providing structure and support so that those lawyers can actually get something meaningful out of those projects.
Wow, okay. You were telling me earlier that iProbono is also involved in a lot of humanitarian work and organizing projects and seminars and conferences for basically your clients and their communities. What sort of work have you done so far internationally speaking?
Well, in terms of the core work that we've done, we've, as I mentioned, engaged in some seminal cases on child sexual abuse or protecting victims of child sexual abuse. So that's all the way from ensuring equal compensation for boys and girls who are victims of severe cases of child sexual abuse. We've also done a recent project on cybercrimes against children, and this is an international issue which I know is relevant to Sri Lanka as well. So covering areas of law which are sort of new and finding innovative legal solutions to those. We've also worked with disabled beneficiaries and organizations that support families of disabled young people. We have also, I think I mentioned, economic, social and cultural rights. So that's a very important issue in the human rights framework and the wider sort of international human rights framework. So thinking of questions of the right to food or the right to housing and how that has implications on the vulnerable beneficiaries that we're working with. So we tend not to do amorphous research, but the aim is really to do research which has an impact on policy, and we think it's very important to work with governments in the jurisdictions that we're working in to ensure that the work we're doing feeds into new legislation and policy.
Okay. So here at Newsfirst too, we have a humanitarian project called Gammed, where we go into the rural villages, and at grassroots level we try to see what exactly is needed by the community that whose voices aren't heard, and we try to help them out as much as possible. Do you see Pro Bono collaborating maybe with Gammed in the near future and helping out in the legal aspect of things?
I think that would be fantastic. It sounds like a very worthy and worthwhile project. As I mentioned, we tend to work through non-profits and civil society organizations, so I think this would be a fantastic model for Pro Bono to work with, and I know that our Sri Lanka country representative is based here and will be very interested to engage in some projects. The aim is to develop a strong sphere of access to justice, and while Sri Lanka has a strong legal aid commission, there's always space for other projects to support that.
There's plenty of people in the rural community who don't even know that, you know, okay, we need legal services, we need to handle a certain situation in the legal aspect of things. How do you think you can close the gap between those people who aren't even sure of how they need to approach the legal system and the people you have on board on Pro Bono?
I think you've brought up a very important point, and knowledge of the law is one of the key issues in access to justice. So putting knowledge of the law into people's hands so they know what their rights are, and B, if their rights have been violated, how they can actually access justice. So one of the things that we've done in India and other South Asian jurisdictions is run knowledge of the law campaigns on various topics, including domestic violence, including, I've mentioned child rights a few times now, but also identity rights. And I think it's a key issue pertaining to citizenship across the South Asia region, but across the world. So access to a birth certificate, for example, often you have in rural communities in particular, and in poorer itinerant or migrant communities, you have situations where young children don't have birth certificates, and that prevents them from accessing a series of rights. So we've done projects where we've enabled families to apply for their children's birth certificates and obtain that very necessary documentation.
So, well, that's very interesting, and there's so much more I want to ask you about Pro Bono, but we are going in for a short commercial break. We'll be back soon. Welcome back to the Hot Seat. I'm here with Mariam Faruqi. We were talking about Pro Bono and what sort of services they provide to the rural communities and people who can't afford legal services. Mariam, tell me, you said that you've done plenty of cases internationally, and they've made so many changes in the lives of people and even in the legal community. What sort of work have you done internationally? Give us a few examples.
Well, I'm going to actually give you the first example is an important case for Pro Bono because it started off our child rights work. And it's a case of a young child who was 3 years old when she was brutally sexually assaulted by a neighbor. And that case was brought to us by one of our partner organizations, Haq Center for Child Rights in Delhi. And the case had failed at the trial court level despite evidence in support of the crime. And it was found by the judge that the child's statement was not sufficient evidence. And the manner in which the young child had been questioned about the crime against her was problematic. So by the time the case came to us, we appealed at the High Court level, and we actually got a positive decision for the child. We had the perpetrator, who was let off at the trial court level, convicted to a life sentence, and we also got compensation for this young girl. And on the back of that, the High Court guidelines for how young children are questioned after these sort of severe cases of sexual abuse were also adapted and changed, and we had input into drafting those guidelines. So now when children are questioned, they will be questioned in a more sensitive and appropriate manner by the judges in charge of their cases. So that's a really good example of a case where we not only impacted the life of one young child, who I'm really pleased to say is doing fantastically well. She's thriving at school, and this has impacted her whole family. But we also changed the law and had guidelines implemented that are going to support children for years to come. I might also mention another case in a similar arena of child sexual abuse, where there was a young boy who was seriously assaulted by two older boys at school. The case went well, the case itself, and went in favor of the young boy. But when it came to compensation under the relevant Indian law, he was actually awarded compensation of about a third of what a young girl child victim would have received under the same circumstances. So we challenged that. And as a result of that case, to cut a long story short, we've now ensured that boys and girls receive the same amount of compensation for those sort of sexual crimes. And I think it's very important to think of this in the bigger picture and how that's going to impact other victims of child sexual abuse.
You were telling me earlier about doing legal work to ensure equality and to focus on the minorities as well. What can you tell me about that?
Well, I think in all the jurisdictions that we're working in South Asia, there's an erosion of the rights of minority communities, and whether that's religious minority communities or ethnic minority communities. And while we have relevant legislation in all our countries protecting the rights of minorities, we're all signatories to various UN conventions that protect the rights of minorities, these rights are not always adhered to. And whether it's lack of knowledge of the law or problems within communities, we think that it's essential that as lawyers we stand up and protect the rights of minorities. So this can be in a variety of ways. We're looking for interesting strategic litigation cases, or it can be cases where we support non-profit organizations and civil society organizations that uphold the rights of minority communities.
Okay, so I mean, we have a good legal community in Sri Lanka. What can you do to make it attractive for lawyers to provide their services for I Pro Bono?
Well, there are various ways of getting involved. I had mentioned earlier that we want to engage the corporate community in more pro bono work. So if you are interested, if you're a corporate lawyer or a commercial lawyer who's interested, you can talk to your firm and sign up to the I Pro Bono project. And we are very sort of adept at guiding corporates at how to sort of include pro bono work in their policies. There are already practitioners who are engaging in pro bono work at various levels, but some might need support with the type of cases that they're doing. So if they're interesting projects or cases, they can also bring those to us. I think I'd mentioned also that we work through non-profit partners and civil society organization partners. So we're on the lookout for interesting organizations to support and work with legally. But I think the main thing also to consider is the value added of young lawyers or even more senior lawyers taking part in pro bono work, and what does it actually add to your life as a citizen of this country and of the various jurisdictions that you're working in. So I think we feel that everybody should be doing pro bono work at some level or the other.
Okay, so if I'm a lawyer and if I'm interested in providing my services to I Pro Bono, why don't you tell our viewers how they can get involved with this more actively?
Well, I mean, I would say the first port of call would be to visit our website and register online. It's a free, very simple online form that you have to fill in, and I'm sure that you can provide details of that.
Yeah, you can just maybe mention the website as well.
Yeah, it's www.i-probono.com. And there's a very simple form that you can fill in to join our network, or please feel free to email us at info at i-probono.com, and we'll be very happy to get back to any of the queries that you might have. And I'm really looking forward to developing our network here in Sri Lanka and having some exciting lawyers work with us.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Mariam Faruqi. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. That's it for Hot Seat today. Have a good night.